Welcome to episode 35 of Gods and Heroes of Ancient Greece. My name is MyLinda, Butterworth, and today we continue with the tale of Theseus and the story of the journey to his father. The first person he met was the robber Periphetes, who went armed with an iron club, to which he owed his name of Club Bearer. With this he dashed to the ground all who came his way. When Theseus reached the region of Periphetes, this ruthless and savage man rushed at him out of the dark woods and blocked his path. But the youth called to him in a ringing voice, "Miserable rogue, you come in the very nick of time. Your club will be just the thing for those who intend to become a second Heracles and a world of rascals." With these words, he hurled himself at the robber, and after a brief combat, slew him. Then he took the club from the dead man and bore it away as a trophy and weapon. On the Isthmus of Corinth, he came upon another evildoer, Sinnis the Pine Bender, so called because when anyone crossed his path, he bent down the tops of 2 pines with his mighty hands and bound his captives with them. And then he released the trees, and it tore his victim in two. Theseus broke in his club by slaying this monster of cruelty. Sinnis had a lithe and lovely daughter, Peregrine. Theseus had seen her flee into the forest when she was killing his father, and now he looked for her everywhere. The girl had hidden in a grove thick with shrubs, and in her childish innocence pleaded with the bushes as though they could understand that never, never, never would she harm them or burn them, or only that they would conceal and rescue her. When Theseus called to her and assured her that he had not intended her any harm and would take care of her, she came out of hiding, and from that time on, he was her protection. Later, he married her to Dionys, the son of Orestes, king of Ochala, and all her descendants kept her promise and never burnt a single plant of the species which had given shelter to their ancestors. But Theseus did not merely clear the road he traveled of destructive men. Always mindful of Heracles, he considered it his duty to wage war upon harmful animals as well. Among other brave deeds, he approached Megara and met with Sciron, a third notorious robber, who had chosen his abode on a high cliff between Megara and Attica. This insolent ne'er-do-weller had a habit of thrusting his feet out at strangers and commanding them to wash his souls. While they did what he asked, he would give them a kick that plunged them into the sea. Now, Theseus punished him with the same death he had inflicted on the others. When he was already in Attica, near the city of Eleusis, he met Cercyon, who was in the habit of waylaying all who crossed his path to challenge them to a wrestling match and kill them after he had won the victory. Theseus accepted his challenge with himself the winner, and rid the world of this plague. When he'd gone a little farther, he came to the last and most cruel of the highway robbers, Damastus, who was better known by the nickname of Procrustes the Stretcher. This scoundrel had 2 beds, one short and one very long. If a stranger who was small of stature came his way, he conducted him to the long bed, saying, You can well see that my bed is much too big for you. Let me arrange it to fit you better." And with this he would stretch him on the rack until the man breathed his last. But he had a tall guest for a night. He took him to the short bed, saying, "I'm sorry, friend, but this bed was never made for you. It is much too small. But we can do something about that." And with this he would lop off his feet and that part of his legs which protruded from the bed. Since Procrustes was a large man, Theseus forced him to lie in his own short bed, and hacked him into shape until he died a miserable death. Thus Theseus made the punishment of most of his evildoers fit their crimes. Up to this point, our hero had not come across anything of a pleasant nature on his journey. But now, when he reached the river Sisyphus, he found men from the race of Periphetes, who received him hospitably. At his request, they first purified him of the blood he had shed, and the rites proper to his service, and then set food and drink before him. After he had refreshed himself in their houses, and given them thanks in warm and courteous ways, he turned in the direction of his father's house. Theseus in Athens. In Athens, the young hero did not find the peace and happiness he had expected. The city was in confusion. The citizens were at war among themselves, and conditions in the house of his father Augeas were not of the kind to favor his coming. Medea, who had left Corinth and unhappy Jason in her dragon-drawn chariot and taken refuge in Athens, had tricked old Augeas into receiving her by a promise to restore his strength and his youth with one of her magic charms. The king and she were living in wedlock because she was a sorceress. She knew that Theseus arrived in Athens before the news of his coming reached the palace. She persuaded Augeas, whom the party strife in his city had made suspicious of every newcomer, that the stranger, whom he did not recognize as his son, was a dangerous spy, and that it would be wise to treat him as a welcome guest and then do away with him by means of poison. Theseus came to the morning meal without having revealed his identity, glad in the thought that his father would discover for himself who it was he had before him. The cup with the poisoned potion was at his place, and Medea waited impatiently for the new arrival, who she feared would drive her from the palace to take the first sip, for she had seen to it that even a few drops would be enough to close his young and watchful eyes forever. But Theseus, who longed to feel his father's arms about him more than to drink from a cup, drew his sword, the one that he had left under the stone for him, seeming to cut his meat, but actually that Augeas might see it and know what it was. No sooner had the king laid eyes on the weapon, which he instantly recognized, than he dashed the cup to the ground. A few questions convinced him that this youth was indeed who he had begged destiny for, and he clasped him to his heart. Theseus was made known to the assembled populace, whom he told of the adventures he had met with on his journey. Joyful acclaim welcomed the youth who had proved his handy hand so early and so often. But treacherous Medea was driven out of the land, for King Augeas now felt only loathing for this cruel sorceress, who had almost succeeded in depriving him of his new-found happiness. And here is where I end my tale for today, but I'll be back tomorrow with more tales, many more tales. Until then, my friends, enjoy the journey.